maybe more than I should, but putting a lot of blame on the game. Like, why isn't the game structured in a way that prevents us from hanging out in the tavern forever and never going and fighting the goblins?
Right.
Because I'm the person who wants to go and fight the goblins and I don't want to just sit around in the tavern. And so part of the impetus to design my game was to make a game that was structured and that wouldn't let people dilly-dally. The game kind of acting as an editor and saying like, nope, that scene's done, or this moment is going on too long. We're going to move on to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing.
What exactly is the genre Magical Girl? And how does it work as an RPG? Stick around and you'll find out. I talked with Andrew Gillis about their new RPG, Girl by Moonlight. Now, Andrew's origin story is one of the most unique ones you've heard on this show. I was interested in why they chose Forged in the Dark as the basis of the game versus Powered by the Apocalypse. Listen closely and you'll learn how the game Darkest Dungeon influenced one of the mechanics in Girl by Moonlight. And if you need a reason to get excited about this game, wait for the segment on the playbooks. It was the playbooks that hooked me. This episode is possible because of the support on Patreon from our patrons. Big welcome to some of the newest floor heads: Athios, Jonathan M., Borgie, Rasmus Peterson, and Bokabard. Okay, sit back, relax, and enjoy my time with Andrew.
Okay, you want to see if you can tell if they're lying to you? Go ahead and roll. Sorry, you missed by 3. Yeah, you think they're telling the truth.
This is Sean.
And this is Navi.
And together we're a couple of Drakes, the creators of Court of Blades and Dead Bell.
When we're not writing games, we're listening to Table Talk. Don't
try that again?
When we're not writing games, we're listening to Tabletop Talk.
Welcome to Tabletop Talk from Third Floor Wars. Your host, Craig Shipman.
Howdy friends, Craig here. Today I sit down with Andrew Gillis, a game designer, former bike mechanic, role player, and the author of the Forged in the Dark TTRPG, Girl by Moonlight. Andrew, welcome to the Third Floor.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I got to make a confession.
Sure.
I've been secretly stalking to get you on the show, and as soon as Sean Nittner connected us, I was like super excited.
Oh, well, that's nice to hear in a way.
Right. Not creepy at all, Craig. Keep going, right? So Andrew, unfortunately, you have to answer the question you get on every single podcast you come on to, but I like to phrase it a little bit differently, which is at one point you knew nothing about this hobby. You knew nothing about taking a sheet of paper, pretending to be somebody else and going through, a scenario and an adventure. I'd like to go back to the moment it was first put in front of you.
So I've been doing something more or less in line with role playing since I was maybe like 6 years old, 8 years old, something in that kind of range.
How so?
So me and my one friend in elementary school, we would do, and like in the current environment, I would almost say it was kind of like having like OCs or doing almost like a fanfic kind of thing, but we would tell stories about characters that we had created while just walking laps around my schoolyard at recess and lunchtime. And that same friend and I later started, checking out like Dungeons and Dragons and some of the other kind of mainstream RPGs that were available, eventually me and him and a couple other folks got into like Vampire the Masquerade and these kinds of things. But it all started with he and I just making stuff up off the cuff at recess, and my characters that I would come up with were incredibly silly little things. They were mostly based off of like little Lego guys that I had or whatever. And, I would build these whole kind of interconnected webs of character and identity and stuff around them. And it, we stumbled our way through the hobby from there, because certainly our first forays into D&D were more akin to making stuff up about some characters that we liked rather than like playing the game properly. So yeah, it was a long road from there.
So quick question then. I would imagine that in elementary school, there's probably a good chance that Andrew did not have a real clear sense of what you were doing. You're just you and your buddy, and you walk around, you tell stories. But now looking back at what you are doing now and your love for this hobby, let's look back at that kid in elementary school. What do you think that what was going on with them?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, certainly, fantasy as an escape is a very powerful thing. Yeah. And whether or not you can put a name to the thing you're running from, you will have that urge to run, maybe, right? So
yeah.
So I think a lot of it was to do with that of not being terribly comfortable in my skin and looking for ways to, find alternatives, I guess. And, like when I say me and my one friend, I really do mean me and my one friend. I had like one friend at school.
Yeah.
And then kind of a patchwork of like acquaintances, but there was like one kid that I hung out with. And so, my horizons were pretty narrow in that way. And I was, I was close with my brother as well, and he was a friend of a sort, but he was 4 years older than me. And so like he and I would spend a lot of time doing stuff, fighting, but also enjoying each other's company, and kind of the pendulum would swing between the two. But every one of those activities that I did were mostly about getting outside of myself. I played sports and stuff as a kid, but I didn't really like it, and I often didn't really feel comfortable in those kinds of social environments that those things create, even though later in life I would become a huge jock for one very particular niche sport,
which was
bike polo.
But I didn't even know such a thing existed. What is bike polo?
So hardcourt bike polo, it's like a 3-on-3 street hockey, but you're on a bike and you have a mallet in one hand and you're trying to.
Oh my goodness.
Score goals. So until I had found that, I was like, no, sports suck. I don't like these things. And then there was like the one site of activity that actually
just clicked,
kind of meshed with me and, felt correct when I got into it. But always I felt really mismatched to what I was doing. And so, yeah, I think there was, in hindsight, there was that need to get out.
Yeah. And, to a certain degree, Andrew, that story is going to resonate with a lot of people listening. Right. 'Cause I think it's for a lot of us kids. And I was one of them for different reasons, or the same reasons, who knows? And I guess what I'm wondering for you, like, we can escape to books, we can escape, to movies, we can escape to drawing and things like that. But for you, it seemed to be storytelling was a powerful escape. And, I'm wondering whether you have a sense of where that drive to tell stories comes from.
Gosh, I mean, I think we naturally gravitate to stories. I think stories are always really powerful, and we make stories out of things that don't have them, right? Like
we do.
I can't help it. I have these like intrusive thoughts all the time where I have a spinal cord injury and I got sick. I had this autoimmune condition. There was nothing I could have done about it or known about it. And still I'm always like, okay, well, what caused it? Like what's the narrative, right? What's the A to B to C, and the rising action of this completely arbitrary thing that happened to me. And I'll still catch myself thinking about that, like, oh, it's because this thing or whatever. And then I'll reflect on it and be like, no, that's nonsense, right? I am ascribing a narrative where there is none. And I think that's a very human tendency. We see people doing this all the time, trying to connect dots. Like conspiratorial thinking is another good example of this, right? Where we so want there to be a clear causality to things and an order, right, to what's happening around us, even as often it's very arbitrary. So I think that's what I would put forward as the source of this impulse. And that is not just me. No. It's all of us, but that stories are really alluring because they, once you have a structure built, right, the structure of a story, you can point that in a direction and run with it as far as you want to go. And that can take you to different places and take you very far from yourself or whatever else that you're, trying to while away the hours while waiting for. So.
And that resonates a lot with me, Andrew, for a couple of reasons. One, stories can be very comforting, and they can be also give us a sense of control, which is kind of what you're hinting at. I have Crohn's disease, which is a chronic disease that nobody knows yet what causes it. They don't treat the disease; they treat the symptoms. And it took me, I went through many stories trying to figure it out and trying to understand it. And it took me a long time to be comfortable with the fact, like, this is just who I am now, right? This is a part of who I am now. And maybe they'll figure it out. Maybe they won't. And I'm going to get through it. But boy, when you say create stories, it was a constant. I would create stories around how did I get here? Mm-hmm. And also create stories about flare-ups, right? So when the disease gets worse or gets better, nobody knows what causes that either. But boy, I'll build a narrative.
Yeah, exactly.
It's amazing how powerful that they are.
Yeah,
So
it's like we need something to kind of hook on to, right?
Yep.
And stories are that handle that you can get on reality or a thing that's happening.
It puts things in order, right? It puts things in order, and we can take that all the way to organized religion. It's all over the place, absolutely all over the place. So you find D&D, and like most kids that play D&D, what you were playing wasn't D&D, even though it may have said it on the box. And then you said you found Vampire the Masquerade next. I'd like to talk about that transition because those are two very different games.
I mean, I could make some arguments for them being very similar in some ways that
How so?
that hold them back. So like, oh gosh, I don't know. Maybe people will flame me on the internet for saying these kinds of things, but VTM is. It takes on a lot of aesthetics that aspire to be more than D&D, right? Like, oh yeah, we've got a storyteller, we're a troupe. There's all these kinds of trappings of these aspirations that extended beyond that. But certainly in the early versions, it was still, like a very thick portion of that book was about how you murder things. And right. Like there was more to it. It talked about social interaction in ways that, D&D really fell short of and still does to this day.
Yep.
But it's baby steps and getting away from that. And I think that's part of why, if us as wanting something more than what D&D was giving us, it was a fairly comfortable thing to slip into where there was still some of that familiar stuff. And certainly for some of the people we were playing with, that was still all they really wanted to engage with. They were just like, how do I maximize my number of actions in a combat round so that I can like mega murder everything? And then I was over there trying to come up with like some arcane character concept that no one gave a crap about, and my, writing my backstory and all this kind of thing. So yeah, I think it was a useful kind of stepping stone out of D&D and got me thinking, that there are other games to play, which was very helpful. But fundamentally, you end up doing a lot of the same kind of stuff, at least with the people I was playing with. It didn't get far enough away for me.
Right. You bent the game to your table.
Yeah,
it sounds
as best as I could. And my other folks at the table were trying to bend it in different directions than I was at that time.
So we talk about Vampire the Masquerade as a stepping stone. What was the leap? When was the first time you came across something and went, oh, now this is what I thought this hobby was? So
I was by pure dumb luck, I kind of stumbled into. So my partner at the time was going to UBC, which is the university out over here, and Avery was organizing story game.
Here we go.
Sessions of just like drop in, come and play some games at a cafe. And my partner got one of these little, ticket stubs essentially to go and attend this thing, and was like, hey, you do this kind of stuff, right? Like, let's go do this thing. And so we went to this little cafe. It just so happened that my friend Daniel was there, who I had met before because I live in a big city that is a small town. He was a roommate of a friend of a friend. So like I was kind of acquainted with some people in this space. And I think I played like Penny for Your Thoughts and Solaris, maybe is the name of it. Not Solaris. The one where the world is melting. Polaris?
Yep.
Solaris? I can't remember.
I know exactly what you're talking about though. Yeah.
So I played a couple of these games and I attended a couple of these kind of drop-in things. And then because I was a familiar face in that kind of, friend of a friend's roommate kind of way, I ended up getting invited to sub in for Avery when she dropped out from the Apocalypse World playtest that Daniel, Avery, John Stone, and some other folks were playing. And so that was a big eye opener for me. I made this absolutely horrible character and had a blast playing them. They were just the worst. And it was great. I just got to, finally have some agency as a player to muck around and get into trouble in ways that I discovered were really, really fun. And that I had been, this was what I had been missing this whole time.
It's really easy to forget just how revolutionary Apocalypse World was, right? There was nothing like it before.
Especially if you weren't like on the Forge or deep into this scene, right? Like for me, it was this huge shift. Like all of these games were so different, even as they spoke in very familiar language. The stuff they were doing with it was so very different. And so it was a big broadening of horizons, big eye opener.
Was it easy or hard for you to make that leap, though? Was it just immediate as soon as you like understood the framework? You're like, yeah, I get this. Let's go. Or did you struggle with aspects of it?
So I think to come back to this whole thing about storytelling, right? Like that's at the heart of a lot of those games, and most games in general that we're making fiction collaboratively together. And so having been interested a little bit in like doing some creative writing, and that was something that I was pretty successful at in course of like academic pursuits and these kinds of things. And so that skill set being available to me meant that these games didn't feel unnatural to pick up, right? Like the stuff that they were doing with fiction and with stories felt very natural. And then the idea of like a game system was also something that I was familiar with broadly. And so the connecting of those two ideas felt pretty straightforward. And that, obviously I've gotten better at the act of role playing over time, but
sure.
But it didn't feel strange or uncomfortable to step into. It was actually pretty smooth.
So it's an interesting statement to say you've gotten better at role playing over time. How do you measure that?
So, I mean, I have a lot of strong opinions. It's part of everyone, I think, who makes a game. It's right that you have a bunch of opinions about how to play role playing games or how they are best, to be structured or whatever else. But I don't know. I was always just very interested in like making compelling characters, telling compelling stories, not, chewing the scenery for too long, getting into the actual, collaborative moments, that the action of the game, and trying to gel well with the people at the table and actually make something with them rather than just be doing something in parallel, if that makes sense. So
it does.
So having these aspirations, I'm always trying to do better at all of those things. And like when I was on actual play shows and stuff, I would review the tapes, and I would look for opportunities for like, oh yeah, how could I have like tied my character's story in better with another character's, or made this moment, resolve more things that were ongoing or whatever. That's always on my mind when I'm playing, and in designing a game, I've always tried to build things out that will enable, those things that will point people at those same targets that I have and help them hit them.
So let's imagine a scenario where I go find one of those more recent APs where you've played, and I watch that, and then I come across this old VHS tape that somebody you didn't know they recorded you playing Vampire the Masquerade. And I go, okay, now I've got a before and after of Andrew. I imagine there's going to be a lot that's different, but what I want to know is what would I find was the same? So after all of this time with all of these games, what do you think that I would have seen in a younger Andrew playing Vampire the Masquerade that I would see in your most recent AP?
So
what hasn't changed?
Let me walk down memory lane a moment and try to review here. So
great.
Yeah, I think something that's been really consistent for me is that I don't tend to like playing heroic characters or characters that you would kind of typically see in the driver's seat of any given, narrative. I've gravitated towards either supporting characters or just like characters that are weird to follow around, right? That their stories are a little bit more off kilter, or they're terrible people or they're villains or whatever. Like, in one of my early D&D games, I played this horrible little changeling person who did betray the party. And at one point I just handed my character sheet over. I was like, nope, they're one of the villains now. Here you go. I'm going to make a new character. So I'm a player who does that kind of stuff and likes to kind of stir the pot. And that has always been true. And I've just I've embraced that more sincerely over time. Yeah. I've just been like, no, I'm going to play a complete piece of shit this session. Like let's go. And, I'm going to find games that let me do that in a way that's, constructive. I don't want to derail the session or anything, but I am going to be plotting and scheming and doing things that are not good for me.
Well, and that's very different than your typical, that's what my character would do type player, right? Those are two different things.
Yes.
Completely. And one of my favorite things as a GM is to come across a player who, when I go, all right, well, let's talk about a consequence. And they're like, oh, give it to me. I love consequences. And those are my favorite players, right? That embrace that entire thing.
Yeah. I mean, the dice are going to give it to you, so you may as well enjoy it, right?
Exactly. So last little piece here, Andrew, there's, now that we have an understanding of kind of your path that's led to here, the one little thing that makes you different than a lot of other people. So there's there's going to be a lot of people that have just listened to your story and it's going to resonate. They're going to find pieces of your story that resonates with them. But what they've only ever done is created at the table. Maybe they're a GM, maybe they're a player. And what they haven't done is what you're doing, which is saying, I'm going to create beyond my table. I'm going to create a game. And I want to get a sense of when that happens and what drives that.
Yeah. So it was something that I kind of had flirted with for a long time, but it's such a big undertaking that I had often like started to nibble at the edges and then bounced off, or like not had enough kind of, like your game design education is secretly happening as you play more and more role playing games. And I hadn't gone through enough courses yet to get that understanding of like what is possible and what structures could exist, or what the medium ultimately really is and what you can do within it. And obviously that's a process that is ongoing forever. But yeah, like getting to that point where this thing that I had said several times in the past of like, oh yeah, I kind of want to make a game, like that actually happening, getting anywhere, didn't happen until GBM.
Well, but pause one second for me though, Andrew. So I have played a lot of games. And I've interviewed a lot of creators. And one of the more common questions that I get from listeners is, hey, Craig, when are you going to put out your game? And I tell them, I'm not going to. Like, I have no interest in creating a game. So I'm trying to get a sense what's different between the two of us.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. Like I've often been especially as a kid, I would always have like big ideas and an inability to follow through on them, but I never let that stop me. There is this kind of hubris present in designing a game, maybe. But also I think like dissatisfaction and having opinions and these kinds of things can also be really big drivers for actually following through on it. For me, a lot of it is about like sitting at the table and playing a game with people and being frustrated with the outcomes that the game is generating, and putting a lot of, maybe more than I should, but putting a lot of blame on the game. Like, why isn't the game structured in a way that prevents us from hanging out in the tavern forever and never going and fighting the goblins?
Right.
Because I'm the person who wants to go and fight the goblins and I don't want to just sit around in the tavern. And so part of the impetus to design my game was to make a game that was structured and that wouldn't let people dilly-dally. The game kind of acting as an editor and saying like, nope, that scene's done, or this moment is going on too long. We're going to move on to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. So, being really opinionated and trying to the point where I am willing to like write a 225 page game manual so that I can shake it at people and be like, no, this is how you do it. So maybe a little bit of spite in the mix as well. But yeah, I can't really put a finger on exactly what
I think you did
drives a person to do.
No, I think you did. I think it's and you tell me if I'm wrong here. Tell me if I've captured this. It's having a voice. Right. When you talk about your opinions, that's what you're talking about. Is I have a voice. I have a perspective on this hobby. And this is one way to express it. Sounds like there's a little bit of problem solving happening where you've found issues and you think it doesn't have to be this way. I wonder if I can fix it. I wonder if I could build something that doesn't have these problems. That made total sense to me, Andrew.
And also, like for Girl by Moonlight, there was definitely a moment where like I watched this one show, Madoka, and had been a fan of other magical girl stuff that I had seen previously, but I watched this show and I was like, damn, that was really good. That's doing a lot of cool things. It would be really fun to play within that space.
Right.
No such game exists, and it is. I'm not going to sit around waiting for it to exist. And so this idea came through that was pretty clear in that sense of like what it would be about and what the aesthetics of it would contain. And so I was like, yeah, why not me making this thing? Why shouldn't it be me that does it?
That's very cool. So guys, the Insider Insight series allows me to sit down with designers, developers, artists, writers, and creators and learn how they approach their work. I try to understand their process, inspiration, and the methods for crafting their creations. That's exactly what we're going to do with Andrew today. We're going to take a quick break. When we get back, let's talk about Girl by Moonlight. Hey, it's me. I'm interrupting this episode, and I hope you're enjoying it, and I bet you're anxious to hear the rest. But before we jump back, I need a favor. Do you know someone who might enjoy this episode? Can you shoot them a quick message or maybe even send them a link to it? Listeners sharing this podcast was the primary reason we almost doubled our audience last year. Also, would you like to see and hear these games in action? Go to the Third Floor Wars YouTube channel and Twitch stream. Our actual plays combine compelling role-playing, character-driven action, and system tutorials. We create great stories while lifting the hood and showcasing the game mechanics. Links to both are in the show notes. Okay, last thing, and I mean it. Have you rated this podcast on your pod platform yet? Maybe even written a short review? It is a simple way for you to be even more awesome than you already are. Okay, now I'm done. Let's jump back and listen to the rest of this episode. So before we jump into this, and I've got all kinds of questions, you might laugh at a few of them, but I think it's important to set the context. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to steal some text that explains Girl by Moonlight. Girl by Moonlight is a multi-genre RPG of magical girls grappling with destiny, hopes thwarted, defended, redeemed, and betrayed. It explores the heartbreak of denying who you are, fighting for what you believe in, and the transcendent power of relationships and community. These magical girls clutch their tragic struggles tight, seeking to score defiant triumphs against the darkness of an oppressive society. Wow. So I am a 51-year-old cis white male. And I sat down, I think the closest I came to this genre, because I understand, I understand what magical girls as a genre is. And I sat down and I watched several episodes of, oh God, what is the famous one? Sailor Moon. Thank you. I watched several episodes of Sailor Moon. And here's what I walked away with. That was really cool. Not my thing, but guess what? It's not made for me, right? And that's okay. So it's okay to see something and go, this is really cool. This is really special. I get why people like it. Whether it is made for me or not, doesn't matter. That it can still be true. But we hear the term magical girls as a genre all the time. And I guess what I want to start with, Andrew, is understanding, like, I think I know what that genre means, but I think you must have a much better idea of what it means than I do. So can we help other old men like me understand it?
Yeah, we can break it down. And like, as with anything, you know, like my game is definitely about like my own relationship to the genre. And so when I say these things, I don't want anyone coming at me being like, you know, like I'm trying to strictly define it or set a definition that will be etched in stone forever.
There's like 5 people who listen to this podcast. You're fine.
Well, and they might all hate me. So a lot of the big things in magical girl fiction are, you know, obviously like the girl part is pretty important. This was a move to having, you know, women, mostly young women, as the protagonists of these stories, and that they would be doing a lot of the things that were traditionally in the territory of, you know, like male comic book hero type of stuff, right? So that was one of the big first initial moves of it to define the genre, right? And Sailor Moon was quite unprecedented when in its moment when it emerged, even though you can definitely be critical of like the relatively narrow band of stuff that it presents as being, you know, feminine, or the definitions of girl and stuff that it uses. For its time, definitely moving in a good direction. And so those stories being at the forefront, that means that you have like a coming of age narrative still, right? Which is a very common and relatable thing that's still very fundamental. It's there. That's why you'll often see in magical girl fiction, the villains will be grown women who are very self-assured, who are very feminine, who are really interesting, almost kind of vampy, like they'll have you know, good makeup and big hair and stuff like this, because that is the natural antithesis to your heroic young woman who's still trying to figure herself out, right? Like Sailor Moon Usagi, she's like a klutz, right? She's not this refined and perfected femininity, right? It's a more relatable, frumpy and dysfunctional one that's going to get there eventually, right? There is this element of aspiration. So that's a really important bit of framing, and all of that will bend and adjust based on who the main character is and what their story ultimately is. But that's a core thing in the genre that bears mentioning. And then when we talk about magical, right, it's that we are going to have there be, magical powers, but also monsters that they're fighting, and that this will also be symbolic or a metaphor, right? And so in Sailor Moon, a lot of what you see is like peers of the main characters that will get turned into monsters by various functionally various social forces that are at play in their lives, that are given form through this magical antagonism that's presented in front of them. And so they're fighting a monster, but that monster is really about I don't know, gambling or being at the arcade too much or whatever, right? Like there's always a lesson kind of stashed away in these things, and that the monsters are allegories or symbols that represent different struggles that people face, and the ways in which, if they cannot have support from other people, that they're going to go down some dysfunctional path, and it makes them literally monstrous.
Interesting.
And that's how you can address those social issues head on, right? In a way that in the real world, right, we can't go punch misogyny in the face, but in Sailor Moon, that might well happen. So that's, I think, another big core thing of the genre.
And how do these magical girls deal with these, right? Do they defeat them? Do they reform them? Do they redeem them? Do they do all of the above?
See, it's more in that space of reforming and redeeming, which I think is also really key, right? It's not that you're going to just, your friend gets turned into a monster and then you just bloodily murder them, right? That's not the vibe. You're there to try to save them, right? You want to make the world better, and you don't do that by just eliminating people that have become problems. You do that by trying to mend things and to give them that support that they were missing. To it's something that's built into my game in terms of you can forgive a monster, and that could be as effective as doing some big attack on it or whatever, right? That there is this emotional valence to everything that is really, really fundamental and equivalent to or in parallel to the action, the more kind of traditional action, right, of swinging punches and jumping over stuff.
So for someone listening now, they're like, oh, wow, I kind of get it a little bit more, and I want to get into this a little bit more. Before we talk about the game, can we give them a couple recommendations? So if we have tickled the interest of somebody who might want to explore this genre, what is maybe 3 or 4 things that you would say you need to go watch or read this?
So I include touchstones in the book for this very reason. It's a really nice shorthand to communicate to people. But I think my picks would probably be Steven Universe by Rebecca Sugar, Puella Magica Madoka, which I can't remember the director's name or whatever, but Madoka is very good. It's very tonally different, we'll say. It's very messed up, but this is to give people a big range, right? Because the genre is really flexible, right? It's a set of, it's like an armature, but you can build a lot of different things on that armature, and so it's nice to see this range. And then to do another weird oddball pick, we could say Paprika, directed by Satoshi Kon, which is a surreal dream traveling thing. But at its core, there is this woman. She's not young, but she does have this kind of identity crisis built into her character concept. And it is about her kind of coming to terms with a lot of that kind of stuff in the process of engaging in this big magical symbolic kind of battle or unraveling of a mystery. And so we're still ticking a lot of those same boxes, even as these things are all very, very different, right? Like in thinking about genre, I did this great course in college where we talked about Westerns, right? So we think, cowboys and all that kind of stuff. And so we watched some of the classic spaghetti Westerns. We read a book called The Englishman's Boy, which is like a really, really revisionist Western that is showing how all these people kind of sucked and how colonialism was awful and all this kind of stuff, right? It gets into a lot of that. And then we watched a movie called Tampopo, which is a Japanese noodle Western.
Interesting.
And it's a movie that's about ramen. And it's the protagonist is this woman, this widow who is trying to take over her husband's ramen shop and doesn't actually know how to do any of the stuff she needs to do. And so this cowboy figure rides in. He drives a truck. He's a truck driver. He has his friend whose name is Gun. And so he rides into town, chases out a bunch of her like shitty regulars, and then helps her learn how to be a better ramen chef and like, you know, get her life back on track. Absolutely brilliant movie, but it uses the format of a Western,
right?
And, you know, has nothing to do with the stuff materially that we would normally associate with Westerns.
Yep.
And so that was just such a wonderful introduction to the idea of genre, and a great way to frame it, right? Is that genre exists in this big spectrum of, right, you know, early works that define the genre into later works that start to question or subvert the genre into just as absurd a twist on it as you want to put, right? They're very flexible and they have a big range. They're really useful so that, you know, authors can get books published, you know, and they can just say, oh, well, you know, it's a noir, right? It's a murder mystery, whatever. Right. And people can be like, oh yeah, that's a box I can put this in, but there's a lot of space within that box to do all kinds of wild stuff. So.
Well, and it's a shorthand, right? And it's
exactly.
also an opportunity to do twists on it, right? So Star Wars is a space Western, right? You know, there's all kinds of different ways that you can mash those up. So we've kind of hinted at the seed of Girl by Moonlight. It sounds like you were watching some of these shows, some of these movies, and you wanted to play in this world. And you said, you know, there's a game here. We go look, we don't see the game. We are cocky and you have the hubris enough to think we can make the game.
Exactly.
But that wasn't like I'm sure you'd had other ideas before that, right? And you've had other ideas since. And what I always find interesting is from a creative standpoint, a creative will eventually pick up an idea and will run with it and take it to not fun part of making the stuff and stay with it. So I guess I want to start there. What is it about Girl by Moonlight that first made you pick that out of the off the shelf of ideas and then run with it as far as you have?
Yeah, I really wanted that particular bundle of aesthetics was very compelling to me. Like I really, really wanted that to be a thing that I could play very badly. And it was at the right moment, I think, where my life was such that I had the time and space and energy to do it.
Right.
I also had the right amount of inspiration around me. I was playing role-playing games a lot because I was basically doing it, at least in part, as a job. Mm-hmm. And so I was just in it. And it was, you know, that immersion within the discipline or the folk practice or whatever we want to call it was absolutely integral to making this happen. It would not have happened otherwise. And so there was also just a clarity to it for me, I think, that like the idea formed very quickly and very comprehensively in a way that I could see the silhouette of the game very early on, and it felt very clear to me. And so it wasn't that hard to pursue that aesthetic or that set of aesthetics. And to know that I was making progress, I guess, right? Which is the really big thing. You get your hooks into it. You start actually feeling like you're getting somewhere. That's very motivating to keep doing it.
Can you help me understand the clear vision at the beginning, right? So that's pretty powerful to in some ways, it sounds like a lot of things that were formed before anything was made. What was that initial silhouette?
So, and it follows, like if I had never played Monster Hearts, I would not have been able to make this game because a lot of the scaffolding from it really comes from that. But basically, you know, I watched Madoka was the big kind of inflection point. And I thought, you know, like, what are the things that are really great that I want to pull out of here? And it's that, you know, I wanted to make a game where bad things would happen to the characters. It was not purely wish fulfillment or sunshine and rainbows. There would be struggle and difficulty and consequence, that magical word that we all role players learn to love. And that I wanted to have something about character relationships and character emotions being very, very central and fundamental to what's going on in the story. Because Madoka ultimately it centers around the one character and basically like a choice that she has to make. And everyone else has opinions about whether or not she should make the choice, which side she should land on, whether she should be allowed to do it at all. Like everyone comes in and gets involved in that, and they all express these different ideas around it. And then the culmination of the story is her doing that, right? Like the plot, the action of the story is way less consequential really than that one decision. Which you come to all through internal stuff and through talking to other characters, and it's very relational and integrated in that way. And so making a game that encouraged that kind of stuff was very inspiring to me. I was very excited about that idea of having this like emotion and character driven narrative. And then lastly, that the characters are kind of, they're tragic heroes in that they are their own undoing all the time, right? Like they all come to ruin because of the qualities that make them great, basically. And so that inversion being possible, right? That the heroic potential of the characters can be flipped, was great. And for having Monster Hearts to look at and see the Darkest Self kind of operation within that, I was very excited about the idea of adapting that into this other thing, which I ended up calling Eclipse, to keep the moon metaphor going.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me, it's a great choice, evocative, right? So you framing this up for me, and then citing Avery's Monster Hearts like totally makes sense. But this is not a Powered by the Apocalypse game. So at what point does Forged in the Dark start knocking on your door?
Well, so this was the other serendipitous thing, is I started out doing a Powered by the Apocalypse game, and I really stumbled in that initial prototype. It was not good. And I wanted to do this kind of like structured play thing because I was very opinionated. And right around that time is when I keyed into Blades in the Dark existing and what it was about, and it checks a lot of the right boxes in terms of those aesthetics that I was chasing, and it was just such a good fit. And so locking that in and deciding to start hacking Blades, and we can talk a little bit about the process of the distinction of designing a game versus hacking another game. That gave me such a powerful roadmap to kind of overlay my ideas onto, and those paths converged or aligned a lot of the time. And so it felt very natural then to grab that and run with it. And Blades is built to be pulled apart and put back together and hacked.
John's made that very easy too. And is so supportive of it, which is great. And listeners already know this, but I'm the biggest shill for John's work, especially Blades. It's hard for me to not bring it up at some point during an interview. I'm glad you did it first. And so as a result, a lot of us are familiar with Blades. It's a pretty big game. And what I always think is interesting when I talk to people that are making Forged in the Dark games is, what did you keep? What did you drop? And what did you reskin? So maybe we can start with what you kept. So what are things that you kept from the basic Forged in the Dark premise that if I've been playing Blades for 5 years now, I'm going to pick up Girl by Moonlight and go, this is super familiar. What'll be familiar to me?
So in my approach to hacking the game, part of my ethos around that, like I probably think about this a little differently than some people do, but if I'm hacking something, usually that's as a matter of respect for the game, right? Like if I think Blades is really good and I want to hack it, then part of my goal is to retain as many of its original pieces as possible. Or if I am taking something out, to plug something back in that has a similar shape, or to make a very deliberate choice about how I'm changing that element. And so there will be a lot of things that are very familiar to players of Blades in the Dark. Like there's still a stress track, there are still special abilities, there are still actions and action dots, but there's one less action in each attribute. So your resistances are lower, you have less action dots overall, so you're less able to act on your own. The game has a mechanic where you gain stress at the beginning of every cycle of play rather than having a device that you go on to get rid of your stress. And it has episodic format. So there's like a loop that you go through and things kind of reset based on that, which is a pretty big departure from Blades, which has this kind of more steady ongoing grind.
Right.
I've pulled out tier and some of the other kind of progression oriented mechanics and really flattened a lot of that stuff down for the purposes of the game. And there's no fixed setting. Instead, everyone authors a setting together in a situation, the adversaries, etc. So that was a big one. I definitely like the setting in Blades is load bearing. And so you can't just replace it with anything and expect the game to still work.
Yep.
And similarly, if you're hacking it, you need to build a load bearing setting, or in my case, provide a set of tools that will consistently output a setting that will be adequately robust to support the playing of the game. And there are a lot of reasons for the setting being important. Obviously, like you need a ghost field to attune to, you need mechanical objects to tinker with, but also like the characters are human beings and there's gravity and all of these other very familiar elements that that it's easy to gloss over, but knowing that that's true about the characters means that when you go, I'm going to jump from this building to that building, the GM can say, cool, that's a desperate move and you will fall to your death. So we're going to call that, Yeah, exactly. Like you need to have some kind of grounding and shared understanding of what's possible. And the setting does a lot of that work. And so it's really useful to have that consensus established as early as possible. And you can get into really dangerous territory when that phrase at the edges starts to break down.
All right. So I'm flipping through my copy of Girl by Moonlight and I go, okay, I see Monster Hearts in here. Obviously I see Blades, fingerprints all over this. Are there games that I might not notice that are in there? Are there other influences, games that you've played that snuck in here in some way?
So I cribbed a mechanic from the computer game Darkest Dungeon.
Ooh,
if you're familiar with that.
I love that game.
So in Darkest Dungeon, when a character's stress meter fills, they hit this like crisis moment. And often that results in them getting this like going into this negative mode, right? Where they're hopeless or desperate or whatever. And they start doing dysfunctional and bad things and messing with you. But there's also a very small chance that they will that they will rise above the crisis and have this virtue that triggers.
And that's the best feeling when you're playing Darkest Dungeon.
Right. And you get it and you're just like, this is sick. This is so helpful. Because, if you're in that situation, then things are bad, right? It's a bad situation that then starts to spiral out of control, but there's a small chance that it actually bounces back.
Oh, that's cool.
And when you roll to see if you fall into Eclipse in the game, if you get a crit on that roll, then this really powerful, big, good thing happens.
That's cool.
You have this heroic moment that then affects the whole team and really flips that scenario. So that was a fun little thing that I got to just fully steal and adapt as a concept, at least, and fit into my game.
It creates a very visceral moment, right? And now, having a person who's played an embarrassing amount of Darkest Dungeon, and as again a fully grown ass adult male, like, will be yelling in my living room when
hooting and hollering when that happens.
Right, exactly. It's like, oh, hey, my stress meter went down, and it's a great feeling, and it's immediately for me to be able to see that happening at a table where things are dark, things are not going well, and someone rolls that crit. That creates the moments that we talk about, for a very long time. I want to talk a little bit, Andrew, because I feel like we didn't spend enough time there. The structure, because we've already learned how important structure is to you as a player, right? And that's part of what drove you to this terrible idea of spending all these hours making a game. Can we talk about, the cycle and you hinted at it, and you said it's not the same as the grind of Blades.
Yeah, so when you play Girl by Moonlight, you're going to run a series, and so that's one continuity of play. That's the biggest umbrella. And then within that, there are seasons, and there are various things that will determine when a season ends and the next one begins. A thing that I encourage people to do is to change who's in the director's seat, which is the kind of GM role, to rotate that between seasons. It's a good opportunity to kind of adjust or reframe the story, these kinds of things. And then every season is composed of episodes, and every episode has a set of phases within it. And so you do the obligation phase, where we see the characters in their day-to-day lives, and they kind of deal with all the bullshit that they have to in those situations. And that's a place where they gain a bunch of stress, like bad things happen to them right up front. And it reminds us, this is the world we're trying to change.
Right.
And then you go into downtime, which will be familiar from people from for anyone who's played Blades, right? And that's when they get to go and do their own thing, and try to kind of get ready for when they go into the next phase, which is the mission phase. And the missions are arranged into tiers, and there's some stuff around that. But the important thing to take away is that there are specific missions for each of the different series that you can play. And you're, as a player of the game, your job is to make those things fit what you're doing. And to have those be a guide to how you kind of progress the story forward. So there is, you don't just get to do whatever you want. There's kind of like a band of action that you're meant to kind of operate within. And then after the mission, there's Fallout, which is a very short phase, but still kind of an essential one, right? Of like how the world reacts to this big thing that you've done, whether you've succeeded or failed. And that episode loop runs as many times as it needs to complete a season. And then, you reset from there.
So I've got 5 people, 5 players are going to sit down. I'm going to run Girl by Moonlight. One of them is going to be the magical girl archetype. What do I do with my other 4 players?
Yeah. So
you understand what I'm asking, right?
Sorry. No, this one's not landing. Sorry.
So I assume that only one person gets to be the magical girl, or?
Oh no. So there's a team.
Okay. So talk to me.
Yeah. So, we have one director, right? Who's kind of our GM role. And then we'll have, between 3 and 4 protagonists, as I call them. And the protagonists, their job is to play a compelling character. And so they are going to pick from one of 7 character playbooks, and they will make up their magical girl, and they're all part of a team and they all work together. So, this is also an element that's really fundamental to Blades and will be very familiar to anyone that's played it, right? Is that you have your gang, your crew, whatever. Right. Similarly, in Girl by Moonlight, we have a group, and that group needs to work together to get things done. And so, one character might be the kind of hero of the story, in hindsight. At the end, we might look back and say, oh yeah, that was kind of our main character, and everyone else was really filling in their story. But all of the protagonists' stories are pretty tightly integrated because they all have a lot of stuff that points them at each other, and a lot of ways in which they're kind of interdependent. So like in Blades, when you recover from harm, you just go see a doctor, and that's like a thing you do on your own. In Girl by Moonlight, you help someone else recover. It costs you your downtime action to fix their harm. And, there is that connection and the interdependence, right? That you then have to discuss as a group. Like, okay, yeah, if I want to get better, I need to ask someone for help. Right. And they have to be willing to help me. And so that group dynamic is really, really fundamental to the game. The power of friendship is a trope within this kind of fiction that I have not turned a blind eye to. We've incorporated that. It's in there.
Well, so maybe what'll help me understand it even better, Andrew, is can you give me some ideas of the playbooks? So
yes.
What are these archetypes?
So I have 7 playbooks in the game. And it's probably not an exhaustive list, but I think it's the kind of the most interesting or compelling ones that I could come up with. And so the one we'll put up front, I guess, is the unlikely hero. And the unlikely hero's whole shtick is that they don't actually have magical powers yet. So kind of like how the mortal in Monster Hearts is the one character type that isn't, the mortal is a monster, but they're a different kind of monster than the other ones. So the unlikely hero, right, they are certainly still a magical girl, even if they're not fully magical yet. But they really fully embody that coming into your own storyline, and you kind of get to pick your moment or have your moment picked for you when you have to embrace that destiny and become the hero of the story. And so in that sense, they're positioned to be really central, and to really at first be really dependent on the other characters, and then later have an opportunity to save them and to have that big reversal of fortune.
That's cool.
And that was a really important design to kind of come up with up front. But then we'll have stuff like there's the outsider, and the outsider is a playbook that has a rival. And so they pick one of the other protagonists, and their whole deal is about having this relationship with that other protagonist, where, they want to outdo them, they hate them, they love them, whatever. And that could be 2-way, where both characters are like, yeah, no, I'm going to do better than you. We are rivals. Or it could be one way where it's like, I really hate this person. I can't stand them. I need to outdo them at every turn. And they're like, no, I like you. You're nice. We're friends. That's cool. Why are you mad all the time? Which, that's like a behavior that I will do when playing role-playing games is I will just pick someone and be like, no, my character is all about messing with your character or engaging with your character. And so it was really fun to make a playbook that centers around that and that makes that pivotal to how it operates. And there's some other stuff within the Outsider about them being, more inclined to violence than the other characters, that they maybe have a troubled past or they used to be aligned with your adversaries or these kinds of things. There are a bunch of little spins that you can put on it, but all Outsiders will have that one central thing that they have a rival and then they're pointed at. And then, something like the time traveler who has traveled through time to change another character's fate. And so they have this thing that they're sure is going to happen.
Interesting.
And really, their whole deal is about meddling in someone else's life and telling them how to live it and deciding that they know better than you what you should be doing. Right. And so that's all put in the frame of time travel and of prophecy and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's really about, being nosy and getting into other people's business.
And that player to player via character bond and connection, right?
And so all the different character playbooks have something like this, where it pretty much forces the player to interact with the other players, to take a stance on what's going on that's going to either match or run against what the other players are doing, and set their characters into complicated relationships with the other characters where they're framing them or foiling them or supporting them or fighting against them in different ways. But that ultimately that friction is made to build towards catharsis and towards, triumph against their adversaries, because you don't end up fighting. You don't fight each other. You go and you fight the other thing. And along the way you might bicker and argue or bounce off of each other, but it's all heading in that same direction.
So of all the playbooks that you look at, what was the last one? What was the last one? Either it may not be the last one you started, but the last one that you sanded the corners on.
So I had this, there's one playbook called The Guardian, and for a long time they were like the first one that I designed. And so they kind of ended up being a little bit too generic. And they were just like sticking to the real core of the genre about like, looking out for your friends and, just the basic stuff. And eventually I was like, no, this is too basic. No one would ever want to play this. And so the finishing touch on that made it work was I came up with this idea that they have a code that they live by.
Ooh.
And so the code is like, there's like a list of things and you pick one of them that you are allowed to do. I'm just going to check my notes so I can read this out.
Yeah.
Because
I'd like to hear what some of these might
particular. So when you play The Guardian, you live by a code, and your code forbids all but one of the following: violence, lying, admitting fault, or asking for help. And so you might be unable to do violence, in which case you can lie and admit fault or ask for help. But if you want to do violence, then you can't lie, or you can't admit fault, or you can't ask for help.
Right.
And so it's this kind of awkward constraint that you get put into, and you get rewarded for playing into it. And you also get rewarded if you make sure that everyone else plays into it as well and abides by your code. And a bunch of other things kind of interact with it. Like when people violate it and that kind of stuff, when your opponents violate it. But that was the clincher for me, was coming up with these special abilities that are at the root of each playbook that they always have. And for a long time, The Guardian didn't have one, and it felt really flat. And so I managed to actually figure out this idea and nail it. And that was the cherry on top that it really needed. And then everything else came together. A bunch of things that were really flat, I kind of put a bit of that flavor into them, and they came alive in a really important way.
So, Andrews, I'm talking to people to make games, and I've learned a lot. I knew nothing about playtesting, and I understand it a lot better now. And one of the things that I think is interesting in playtesting is finding out the big problem, right? I hear playtesters are really good at finding what's wrong with your game. They're terrible at telling you how to fix it, but they're really good at pinpointing problems. So in the playtesting process, what problems did they find that you attacked?
No, the game was perfect. Right at the start.
Great. We play tested it once. It was me and
yeah. So the process of playtesting, I mean, I was very fortunate in the playtesters that I had because a lot of them really got the concept and leaned into it in a bunch of important ways. So like my friend Violet did me a kindness and kind of looped me into doing a long running playtest campaign with her and some other folks. And so that was immensely helpful, but the playtesting process was pretty smooth and that I didn't have to tear up a ton of stuff and redo it. There was a lot of like dialing in numbers and trying to hit the pacing that is built into the game.
Right.
Was definitely a pretty delicate thing because if it's too forced and too arbitrary, then it really starts to grate on players and it can run contrary to the emergent kind of story that is happening. And you don't want to have to be ramming the round peg through the square hole with your story. Well, it's like, okay, now we have to do the climactic thing, but we don't really feel like we're there yet.
We're not there yet. Yeah.
So a lot of those kinds of tweaks and measures and adjustments, which I kept going back and forth on over the course of development, and playtesting was really essential in nailing those and playing with people who had a really good rhythm and who could drive the story to those places without the game's help, right? And then you kind of match their pace, right, or fall in line with their pace. Was definitely a big thing. But yeah, I got really lucky. Other than having that, I started as a Powered by the Apocalypse game, and I ditched that after one playtest session, right? Like that was probably the most dramatic. Just like, no, this is junk. Get it out of here. I stayed pretty true to the kind of core conception of the game pretty consistently. There was lots of little like small scale dialing, but the broad strokes stayed relatively untouched, which I think was a result of me having that really clear aesthetic goal right up front, and a really good scaffolding to build on in terms of Blades in the Dark and Monster Hearts. Those did a lot of the heavy lifting. Like I didn't have to reinvent a system for rolling dice or any of these things, right, where you would really spend a lot of time grinding normally. So running it as a hack made that process so much smoother. And just, hitting good tables like at Go Play Northwest, the way I got my publishing deal was with a playtest copy of the game where the crew at the table was my friend Violet, John Harper, Andy, and then Sean like came in halfway through and watched us play, and I got home and had an email that was like, hey, you want to publish this game? It's really great. So
that must have been incredible. Starting with John Harper sitting to play your game. So
my hack of his game, right?
Well, yeah, like, and we're not going to gloss over this. So now I'm going to make you go back to then, right? So you have got a hack of this person's game. They sit down at your table. What the hell is going through your mind?
Well, so I'm cheating a bit here because I already knew John before that. Okay. And we had played a game together. We played a game of Apocalypse World way back in the day. But
this is different.
And we really hit it off during that, though. Like his play style and mine line up pretty well. And we hadn't.
He's hard to get along with.
I mean, he's easy to get along with at the table at the very least.
He's really easy. He's annoyingly pleasant.
And so, he and I became friends after that later down the line, or at least closer friends, but we were acquainted. And so it wasn't too uncomfortable. I was nervous, obviously, but everyone at that table was so adept at role playing and so bought in that it ran smoothly. And, credit to them for making my publishing deal happen.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it was also not the first session I had run at that convention. And I had another group with just some people I didn't know, some complete strangers, but it played out really nicely and it was fun. And we were doing at that stage, here's the wild thing, is at that stage, the game did not have its like convention play one-shot model that I later developed. And so we had to go through the whole process that you would do to set up the game for a campaign play, which is pretty extensive.
Yeah.
We got through all of our world building and everything like that, all character creation within the first like 45 minutes or hour of sitting down at the table, and then got to play for like 2 or 3 hours. And those players being as capable as they were was what let us actually get to the meat of the game and really move through it. If they had been clumsy or slow or whatever, right? Like that wouldn't have sung the way it did, and I wouldn't have landed my publishing deal.
And that I can't even imagine what it must have been like when you got that email. That has got to be quite a moment.
Yeah, I have this weird thing where anytime I feel any big emotion, I always also get sad. And so it was like this really exciting thing that was, I was very happy about. And I was like tearing up and was like upset and kind of distraught when I was at work. And one of my coworkers came into the break room and was like, "Are you okay? Do you need a hug?" And I was like, "I do need a hug." Which was very sweet of her to offer. So yeah, it was big, and a great deal of work still to be done following that. But it wasn't too long from there to get to a point where like the game system, the rules, the mechanics, the abilities and stuff like that were pretty much locked in by early 2018. So
let's say that I'm a director, and I've got 4 people at my table that we're gonna play with. We're gonna go through everything, right? We've got time upon time. We're gonna meet every week, but I've got one player who is not familiar with this genre at all. What would be a good thing for the director to do to really kind of set the stage for somebody who just has not only never played Girl by Moonlight, but is unfamiliar with the touchstones as well?
So hopefully I've designed this game in such a way that you don't actually need to be familiar. The stuff for world building it's guided enough that it very reliably outputs a suitable magical girl situation, setting, characters, and so on. It was something that I worked at pretty hard because you pull the setting out of Blades, you need to put something robust in its place. And so I knew that I needed to deliver a really holistic system, and sequencing it correctly was also a big thing to figure out, because what I settled on is this idea that the very first thing you do when you sit down to play Girl by Moonlight is that you name the antagonism. And so you know what you're fighting against. And then the next thing that you figure out is what the world is like, what the mundane world is like. And so you get the sense of, okay, cool, here's what we're fighting. Here's the world we're trying to change. The game asks you what society holds to be sacred and what society holds to be profane.
Nice.
And then later it asks you how you embody what society holds to be profane, and how you choose to undermine or counter what it considers sacred. And the things that society holds to be sacred are things like money, hatred, like they're all bad things.
Right.
And it considers love profane or whatever, right? And so I'm trying in the course of this world building to always show all the players at the table, like what is at stake within the game, what matters, what is this game about. It's all deep into the roots of all of that stuff, and the things that you need in order to make good decisions, you're gonna build out those things ahead of time. And so you're never going to be left bereft, not knowing what's going on. And it starts out with very guided stuff where you're picking from prompts, and by the end you're answering these very open-ended questions because you've got that grounding and that understanding. And character creation happens kind of in the middle of that. And so there's this thing where you're never making characters in Girl by Moonlight into a vacuum, because they will really fall flat if you do that. The game really wants you all to be tightly integrated and related, and to make sense together, to be a cohesive group.
So we're recording this before the crowdfunding begins, but we're going to release it in tandem with that. So people listening right now, you can scroll down, you can get the link to the crowdfunding for Girl by Moonlight, and we'll wait till you get back. But I talked about the start. We've talked about the middle. The other part that fascinates me in this process is the end. It tends to take a lot longer than we wanted it to. It tends to be a lot more tedious. The fun part's over. When are you going to put the pencils down? And don't tell me deadlines. I want to say, as a creator, when do you stop? When do you know, like, hey, okay, I'm not doing this because Sean told me to. I am done with this game.
I mean, yeah, like there are still bits of it that I could go back and, maybe rework a little bit here and there. Like, you will never, I think, hit a point where you're truly done with it. You just stop. I think it's definitely a truism about art, because you're never the same author, right? When you revisit it
a good point.
A year later, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have changed, you have grown, you're different.
Yeah.
You've gotten better or worse at game design, and you're going to have different ideas when you see that thing and react to it. I had this really funny experience because you had mentioned in kind of the initial emails to set up this interview, you had mentioned some work I did for Hack the Planet. And I went back and read that, and like, I was like, oh damn, this is good. Like,
I thought it was great.
I didn't even like recognize it at first, because I handed that in from the hospital while I was going through. Me? Yeah, I had like done all the work basically right before. But my final submission from that was done from a hospital bed. And so it kind of exists within this space in my memory that is really dominated by these other events that were happening. And so it was just like completely out of my mind. And I went back to it and I was like, oh shit. And then I was like, oh yeah, but I could like fix that. I don't quite like this use of language. There were some bits where I was like, yeah, I would engage with these topics a little bit differently now. So yeah, like you're never really done with any idea. You just choose to set it down and have the restraint to stop fucking with it, right? And move on and work on the next thing, which is really important to be able to do.
But what's interesting about that for me, Andrew, is that, you know, the cliche is that I don't watch my own movies. I don't read my own books. You know, when I'm done and I walk away. It's pretty cool for you to go back to Hack the Planet and go, I kind of like this. Like I could hear the pride in your voice, and that's got to be kind of cool.
I mean, it's ideally you end up in a place where you're not embarrassed by your prior work, right? And like, you know, some of the more kind of the prose bits of the GBM manual, some of them I will read them and I'll be like very happy about it, right? I'll be like, damn, this is good. This is moving. This is compelling stuff. And you know, it's easy to get self-conscious about that stuff as well. And, you know, I experience some discomfort with acknowledging whether or not I think something that I've done is good, but I've tried to be kind to myself as well in that way. And so, yeah, like, I've stopped working on Girl by Moonlight mostly because I want to move on to the next thing. And I want to put this idea down. I don't want to play with it anymore. I want to move on, but also, I am happy with where I got the game to, and with the, you know, especially the work around writing the manual. That was a big undertaking, and that's kind of like a separate thing from designing the game, right? It's about, you are revisiting the game when you do that, I think, because you are, you know, this is commentary upon your own work, right? To explain it to people, to tell people how to play it. And it's a completely different skill set to write a good game manual versus writing a good game. And so this like completed version of the game that I had in 2018, right, largely unchanged, I still had to do several hundred pages of writing about it. I had to write, you know, nonfiction about my own work that I had created. So, so in that sense, right, like you revisit your work at least a few times in that process. But yeah, I'm actually in a place where I'm happy with it, which is not usually my attitude towards things. I'm pretty grumpy and self-deprecating about a lot of stuff. But
and I think it's important for people listening to understand, you know, when we talk about crowdfunding, we can crowdfund things in many different stages, and I think it's good for them to understand that this thing is baked.
Oh yeah,
it might be on the cooling rack a little bit between now and when it gets in their hands, but it's fully baked, which I think is pretty exciting. So guys, we're going to take another break. When we get back from this break, we're going to get to one of my favorite segments, and what I'm hearing is one of your favorite segments. We're going to talk about what you're grooving on. We'll be right back. This is the part of many podcasts where someone comes on, interrupts the show, and explains that you should consider paying for the content that you're listening to right now for free. That pitchman explains by giving $1 or more a month, you not only support the show, but you allow the show to grow and improve. Here on the third floor, we refuse to interrupt your episode of Tabletop Talk with such time-wasting pleas. We pledge never to run a spot asking you to go to patreon.com and give $1 or more a month, because supporting content creators keeps the content coming. Even if there is a link in the show's description, and there is, we don't ask you to click it and become a patron. We don't waste time rambling about the benefits like early access to episodes, getting episodes without ad breaks like this, or even getting a chance to play in one of Craig's RPG sessions. Anyway, Enjoy this episode knowing Tabletop Talk, despite being supported by its patrons, won't engage in such blatant appeals for support. Okay, so as I probably alluded to, Andrew, this has become a bit of a favorite segment for a lot of the audience, and I know it's one of my favorite segments because I think it's so interesting to find out what stuff is being created outside that creatives enjoy, and I find it very insightful as far as understanding the type of creator you are. So we're going to put you, instead of spending an hour or so with me talking about what you make, we're going to put you in the passive seat, the receiver seat. So is there anything, books, movies, video games, or anything that's gotten its hooks into you recently?
Well, yeah, I've been trying to read more and get back onto the, because, it's something I enjoy a lot, but don't always make the time for. And so I've been tearing through a bunch of books, really enjoying the work of Jeff Vandermeer, which is two trilogies by him that I've kind of finished recently and not so recently, the Ambergris trilogy and the Southern Reach trilogy, both very different works, but...
And I'm not familiar with either of them. So let's start off with, if someone is listening right now and they're going to start, which trilogy should they start with, and what the hell is it?
The Southern Reach trilogy is really good, and I think a great introduction to the author and kind of what he's about. It's sort of in the kind of horror genre space, but really interested in the natural world and the kind of internal world of people. And so the Southern Reach trilogy is about follows these characters who are going into a place called Area X, which is somewhere on the coast of Florida, this exclusion zone that is weird in various ways, and that they journey into, but it's all kind of tangled up in symbolism and metaphor around trauma, grief, and as the last book in the series is named Acceptance, this idea of coming to terms with things that you have gone through and the ways in which that changes people, and the versions of yourself that you leave behind in the process of that.
Now, this rings to me of Annihilation, the movie Annihilation. Is there a parallel there?
Annihilation is the first book in the trilogy. So yes, absolutely.
Look at that. Okay.
So there's some context for
okay. So Annihilation is based on the first book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so how did the movie do for a book that you enjoyed so much?
Well, I haven't gotten around to seeing the movie. I was going to watch it with a friend of mine after I finished reading the books, and I've only just recently polished off that series. So I'll get to dig into it. But I'm optimistic. I really like I know the cast in it. I recognize a lot of people in the cast in it, and they're all very good actors. So
yeah, I am having not read the book. I enjoyed the movie. And I guess it's true enough to the adaptation that your description of the series made me think of the movie itself.
Always a good sign, right?
It's a good sign. So when you were reading this, did it get you right from the beginning? Like the first book, you're like, I'm in, or did you hate read it and get to the good stuff? Or
Oh, I loved the first book. The main character, the biologist, who's kind of your perspective character, she's written in this way that is both like, she's an unreliable narrator, but mostly in terms of how she reports her own feelings.
Right.
Which is a really unusual way to frame that, right? Usually that's the thing that you get for sure, is that you understand the character's internality, and then how they see the world is kind of fuzzy or flawed in some way. But my read on it is mostly that like she reports very accurately what's going on and takes a lot of interest in, the environment around her, the natural world. She's a biologist after all. But that she is really cagey about her own history and her own feelings and motivations for things. And so it's a really compelling tension to have when reading a book, because you're trying to like figure the person out rather than figure the events of the story out.
Like its own little mystery within the context of that. That's interesting. And I find unreliable narrators fascinating when I'm reading, but if done wrong, it's frustrating, right? It becomes a very frustrating read. And I've read many times where it's done well, and sometimes where it's just frustrating and I don't care about this person anymore. How soon do you realize the level of reliability that she's giving? Like, is it pretty obvious from the beginning, or does he unfold it? Or
yeah, for me, it kind of snuck in over time, because initially you expect people to be vague, but then she like insists on being vague throughout the story, and you really start to question, why she's delivering things the way she is. And this book, or a series of books, I was reading this while finishing up some of the extra material for Girl by Moonlight, and it definitely informed what I was writing in the or kind of reframed how I was approaching two of the like single session kits that I'm making. The one for Beneath a Rotting Sky pulled some more of these like biological horror elements and ecological kind of adversity stuff that is presented in those books. And then in A Maze of Dreams, that whole idea of like a story that's about a character who is really reluctant to reveal their interiority to you is really central to how I'm building out this one shot, where it's the landscape is the dream of this one character that all of your protagonists have a relationship to. And so you go into her dream to try to figure out and solve all these mysteries, but you're also intruding upon her psyche. And so, there's all of these ways in which these different tensions are at play within that. And reading those books definitely helped percolate those ideas in my head.
Wow, that's super fascinating, because at one moment we've got a player character who is both a character and the landscape at the same time in their own way. Like how, like, I think that's so cool, but I don't know how you pull that off. How much let's say I'm playing that particular PC where everybody's coming into my dreamscape. Am I in control of that? This is super interesting.
Oh, sorry. So yeah, the character whose dream you go into isn't one of the protagonists. She's She's one of the kind of adversaries. She's referred to as one of the suspects in the series.
Okay.
And so neat. The director would mostly be responsible for portraying her. But yeah, you end up in this place where you're creating like a symbolic landscape, a landscape that is formed in metaphor and to reflect this person's interiority. Yeah.
So how much, to bring us a little bit off topic or back on topic, because now we're going to talk about Girl by Moonlight. When you say a one session, right? And this is obviously it sounds like a different mode for the game. I'm interested to understand what changes. So what adjustments are you making to make a one session possible?
Yeah, so I've tried to develop like what I've thought of as like a vertical slice of the game. Ooh. So it's a trimmed down version of every step that you would do in the normal process of like, creating your setting and all these things that we kind of talked about being present in the game. Those are all still there, but in these ways that are made quicker and more digestible and easier to play and just, hit the ground running. So rather than go through this whole prompt picking question and answer kind of process, a lot of the setting and situation are pre-written, but then the players are still expected to do some interpretation. So the director obviously has to present these things and put their spin on it, but also that each protagonist who's kind of pre-generated, right? You have your character that you pick up. That particular character will have certain questions associated with them. And you will be asked those questions and expected to answer. And they're both positioned from the perspective of your character, but they speak to the broader context that you're within, or get you to define some element of the adversity or whatever, but something that's relevant to your character. So like in the one for On a Sea of Stars, there's a character who tried to liberate the Leviathans from, because they're these human made world ships. And she was a rebel who tried to like stage this insurrection and liberate these ships that were kind of enslaved by humanity. And so a lot of her questions are about, how the institutions that remain fundamentally misunderstand and misrepresent the Leviathans.
Oh, that's cool.
And so it's something that's like close to her heart, but that the player for that gets to speak it into existence.
Is it accurate? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So there's that element of like letting the players kind of answer some questions in a more tightly controlled way, but also that like every phase of the game is a little bit pared down as well. You take fewer downtime actions. It's just kind of streamlined a bit. And in a way also like a tutorial for the game. So if you've never played it before, it's a lot easier to pick it up and run with. Got it. Because there's a little more scaffolding at the cost of you having a little less, formative input that there really isn't time for anyway. So my hope is that it's a good balance.
So this concept of of table sourcing via prompts is relatively new to me. And I'm going to start off by saying I was skeptical at the very first time I bumped into it, and now I'm totally in love with it and have picked it up and put it in games where it doesn't belong because I'm really enjoying it. Where I think it really registered for me is in Jason Cordova's work with the Brindlewood Bay series. And what he'll do there is very leading prompts. So, for example, Andrew, I might say to you, so you walk into this library and Andrew, what is it about this library that makes you not trust the librarian? Right. So it's this very leading prompt, but also gives you agency. How close is that to what you're talking about? Is it that same type of thing?
Yeah. Right. Like the question kind of inherently frames and sets up a bunch of things, and then you get to put your spin on it. It's like, when you're trying to get a kid to do something, you want them to go outside with you because you got to go to the store or whatever, right? You're not going to be like, cool, do you want to go to the store or not? Because then they're going to be like, no, I want to stay at home and play with my toys, whatever they're going to do. They're a stubborn kid. They're going to react against what you want them to do.
Exactly.
So instead, you don't give them the choice. You say, cool, we're going to the store. Do you want to wear your red jacket or your blue jacket?
Yeah.
These kinds of questions are really, really helpful if there are like certain things that need to be there, right? Which in the case of Girl by Moonlight, there are certain kind of structural things that need to be there. There needs to be adversity. There needs to be this, that, other thing. So we make sure that those things are in there, but I still want to give players of the game, they're still going to make that interpretive step. Right. And to my mind, that's a really productive one, right? I can curate a set of ideas or themes that they're going to play within, and that should be compelling, right? It's easier that way. They don't have to pick from absolutely everything. It's not a blank canvas. I'm saying, yeah, here are some colors, paint with these. And that's something that I always appreciate in games when the game is like about something specific and gives me some guidance, but then lets me take it and spin it and interpret it.
And I think what I love the most about it, and it sounds like that's what's present here, is that the answer is meaningful, right? It's not just, what is the bartender's name type of table sourcing, right?
Yeah.
It's something that actually is going to impact the path and how that narrative unfolds. Did you know from the very beginning that you wanted this to be part of that process? I'm curious whether that was a North Star at the very beginning of the design work, or is that something that came in later?
It's something that I've always really enjoyed, like Apocalypse World. It does a really great job of putting a bunch of this stuff in kind of secretly, where it's, about like picking names for things, or which is a little more surface, but then maybe also like what kind of, like what is your angel's, home or setting or infirmary like? What is the mechanics, workshop, like what's in it? And there'll be these prompts, and picking those and combining them already creates that's already an expressive move that creates something new, but then also to combine them and then interpret them right between those two acts, there's already a ton of creativity at play there. Right. And this is, we can tie this all the way back to was it Gustav Klimt with the urinal that he picked out, right? Like the act of selection is a creative act. The act of curation is a creative act. We have a lot of precedents academically for these kinds of things. So I see no reason why that shouldn't exist in role-playing games. And we always do that with any game, no matter what, because in the course of playing it, we are recontextualizing it. Right. We always have to interpret the rules. The rules are software that runs on really messy, fungible kind of human hardware. Right. Yeah. And so I think to embrace that is a very powerful move, and to make that really explicit is going to get people, it's going to prime the players of the game to understand that that's what they're doing at every turn.
I've never thought about it that way, Andrew, that in reality, this is not new. It's codifying what's always been happening, right? And just putting a little bit, to your point, putting a little bit of structure around it, which is interesting. Now, when I have conversations with GMs and I talk about which again, not a new thing, but new to me, and I'm now in love with this little technique. Sometimes I hear pushback, which is, players don't want that. Players don't want to be put on the spot. They, what if the player doesn't say, can't come up with something? Is there advice that we can give? Because I'm lucky because my tables have embraced it, right? They've had no difficulty doing it. but I could imagine that there's potentially players that are like, yeah, this is not for me. This is not fun. What are your thoughts on that, or maybe ways we can help in that scenario, or still play with those people and allow them to get enjoyment? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, to go back to that idea of this is software that's running on flexible human hardware, right? Like we always are able to adjust things and
right.
People will do this without even noticing that they're doing it a lot of the time. But like if something about a game doesn't work for you, you're not, beholden to the rules. I'm not going to show up at your door and get mad at you if you play my game quote unquote wrong. Right. And I won't.
You're not getting a 404 error.
No, exactly. Right. It is. They don't fail hard and abrupt and completely in the way that software running on computers does. We have this flexibility that we innately bring to them. And so I would think just, make adaptations as you need to, right? For whatever reason, whether it's a matter of like an accessibility thing in terms of just someone really doesn't think well, on snap moment to moment decisions, but given some time, they'll come up with a good contribution. Or if they need to like have notes or be prepared beforehand, right? Like there's no reason why they can't read ahead or look at the series ahead of time. In my game, like, again, I'm not going to show up at anyone's door and tell them to do otherwise. And like I have to accept the fact as a game designer, as a writer of role-playing games, that like I write the game rules and then people are going to do whatever with them. And as much as I might want them to play a certain way, I have no insight into what they're doing and no control over what they're doing. And that they should take it and adapt it to their needs and adjust it and fit it into their play culture, because, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, is a role-playing game play culture going to be anything like it is now? Almost certainly not. Right. So there's always going to be that translation step that needs to happen. And there's lots of room to sneak in changes and codify it however you want in that process.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I think, obviously covering it during session 0 and a cat's process of saying, hey, this will come up. How do we feel about this? And kind of setting those expectations. I promised you at the beginning of the segment that we were going to go way off topic, and we already did. So I'm going to bring us back, but I'm glad we did, because that was super interesting. But I want to talk about the second trilogy. So we've got the first trilogy. And I love, the last book hints a little bit of what the overall journey is. Second trilogy has nothing to do with the first.
Yep. Completely different. It's more of a fantasy story, although not in the sense of like swords and dragons and adventuring. But they center around this city, this fictional city named Ambergris, or Ambergris. I guess it's Gris, which I always want to go. The Francophone in me wants to make that clear. But it's this fictional city that's on a river, that is colonized very early in its history. And there are these mushroom people who get slaughtered and driven underground, and then the colonists like chase them underground and have these horrible harrowing experiences, and the king comes back out. He's the only survivor, and he's blind and has like gone kind of off his rocker. It's a whole weird, there's this whole like scary creation myth around the city it's founded in colonial violence in this way that's really that's almost fable like.
Interesting.
And the whole first book is this collection of like essays and documents and kind of in fiction historical stuff from the city that
like
then
artifacts.
Yeah, sort of. So mostly as texts. And then a lot of them are interspersed with like actual moment to moment narration from those times. So like one of my favorite stories from within it, because it's kind of a bunch of different stories, is it's about an artist, a painter who's an incredibly famous painter. And so it's all of these art history academic essays about him, or excerpts of those essays.
That's interesting. About
his works, and then showing you his actual experience in his life and the things that informed those works. And all the art historians are totally wrong, but in these ways where their assessments are grounded in like the history or the attempts to like do myth making out of like this figure or the history of the city or the events that were happening. And really the truth of the matter is much more these like harrowing personal experiences that the artist has, that are also like really unbelievable. Like no one would ever believe that he had been through this thing that happened where like, this important he is forced to like murder this important historical figure.
Wow.
And like do all these other weird things that like, you know, no one would ever believe his story if he told them. And he makes these paintings that are about those experiences, but because the people looking at them historically have none of that context, right? They impose this other thing onto it. So there's this really complicated, narrative structure going on that isn't hard to read by any measure, but like imagine sitting down to write that as an author, right? It's a very multi-layered thing. And I think it speaks really highly of Jeff Vandermeer's skill at writing prose that he's able to pull off this maneuver. So very, very interesting book. The second book is a biography of this historian who's really interested in the like mushroom city or people that are underneath the city now and still kind of are around, but kind of on the fringes of things. He writes a biography. His biography is then annotated by his sister.
Oh my God.
But then he comes back and annotates the annotations and kind of closes off the narrative at the end. And so it's this really interesting exploration of this individual and his, personal history, his academic works, on and on and on. So these
That's
very
incredible.
Structurally layered books, very, very cool stuff. Really compelling. And then the third book in the series is just a really competently written noir. And it's just like, okay, dude's got range, he's doing this whole range of things and they're all really great for what they are. They're all very different, but they're all kind of centered around the same fictional city.
Got it.
Yeah. Very, very cool set of works. I sat down to read it as an ebook. And so I wasn't aware that I had all three books in one thing. And so I was reading, I was like, damn, this shit's long. And I kept going through like, oh, there's another book. Okay, cool. Kept going.
Page 4 of 3,000. My God.
Yeah. Like it was honestly like 600 pages of material or something all told. So it was really funny to just kind of naively stumble into this collected works, but I was delighted at every turn. So
yeah, that is fascinating. Fascinating because obviously, like you said, it layered, like so many layers here, so many different, and within those layers, so many different places to make some statements and to put in a perspective by using multiple perspectives. That sounds absolutely fascinating to me. One of my favorite books that is did something not similar, but the only thing I can think of that's a line is Bram Stoker's Dracula. One of the things that I loved in Bram Stoker's Dracula is that it's all letters, right? So, but to be able to unfold that incredible narrative story using documents in that same way, it's incredible. But then to put on top of that within the biography to have the annotations and then the annotations of the annotations, each of them having their own perspective. I mean, that's fascinating.
Yeah, like an argument happening through letters or exchanges. Yeah, it's always so really fun to witness. So,
that is so cool. All right, so we've got 6 books that we're gonna jump onto, and you've done an incredible job selling it. Both of those books.
That's
anything
your homework.
else? I know, right? That's what everybody hates about this. So people get mad at me on this podcast, Andrew, because there's a term that's been coined by mostly the patrons on our Discord. They call I've been Craiged. And what it talks about is like I hear Craig do an interview, and not only do I end up buying the game because it sounds so cool after hearing about how it was made, but then in the last segment I end up buying like 2 video games and 3 books after hearing how cool those are too.
Well, much to the disappointment of these listeners, if you buy my game, it's kind of 4 games. You have to play it at least 4 times in each of the different series play sets, and then there's 2 trilogies of books I've mentioned, plus another 7 books by another author that I'm about to pitch.
This free
so it's
podcast
a whole
is
curriculum
really expensive
at this point. Yeah. Well,
right,
that's what the library is for. That's why I got most of these books.
True.
I've been very delighted. But a friend of mine actually works at the library now, and so it reignited the library's existence and my attention. I was like, oh right, I can just go get these books for free.
It's funny how you easily forget that. I rediscovered it with my daughter, right? Because she's become a reader, thank God. And I took her to the library and I had the same experience. I'm like, how did I forget that this was a thing? Right? Because it was a huge part of my childhood.
Yeah, the same is true for me. I used to spend a lot of time in the library, and it's kind of one of the last remaining, especially in America, one of the last remaining kind of public spaces where you can go and hang out and you don't need to pay money to be there. Yeah. And it is a public good kind of unabashedly.
And a community magnet too, because a lot of the community programs are happening there. And and whatnot. And then I'm not going to get into it, but then to see them under attack the way they have been, like,
yeah, it's very distressing, right?
Yeah, I get a little angry. But we won't. That's a whole nother podcast. Craig is angry about something.
Yeah, I started writing my game in 2015, 2016. And I was very worried that its moment would pass, that it would be published into a world where, like trans people are more broadly accepted and it's chill now, and like internet culture and like weird cultish behavior and like viral information virality would have a different character to it. But no, in fact, it has only gotten more and more pertinent, and I'm upset about this. I would rather its moment had passed.
Yeah, don't take this the wrong way, Andrew. I would love for your game to no longer be quite on topic. That'd be great if we could.
Yeah, exactly. given the subject matter I'm engaging with. So it's been a bit distressing to see that unfold, even as part of me then is like, it's going to be good for the sales numbers though. It's going to be good.
You little dirty capitalist, you.
Or just, smugly being like, I did see this coming. I was onto something.
It's true. I called it.
There's a way in which it is affirming of like the ideas that I've had and that I'm exploring, but also, I really wish it was not so.
Yeah. It'd be great if it didn't have to be a subject, but all right. So we've got some more books.
Yes. Just to carry on. I'm reading another book by this author. So Becky Chambers is another one I would highly recommend. She's written a bunch of science fiction stuff as well as some other genred work. Maybe more solar punk would be the category I'd put it in. But her science fiction work is really interested in cultures and the ways in which, history and culture are intertwined and affect each other. So I'm reading a book called The Record of a Spaceborne Few at the moment that is really, really interested in kind of alien intercultural exchange and experiences. And so it's about a bunch of travelers who kind of get stranded at basically like a space truck stop together by this accident that happens outside. And they're all, only kind of partially or somewhat familiar with each other's cultures and experiences, and get to learn about each other through these various kind of passing interactions. And there's all these different characters, and the chapters kind of alternate whose perspective it's from. And so you get these they're different experiences of each other and the things that are strange to them. There's this really charming bit where they're all talking about how gross cheese is, because none of them are human. They're all like, cheese, that's so weird. And one of them has to explain what cheese is because the others don't even know about it. And like the thing that they're most creeped out about is that it's made using milk. They're like, they drink milk and they're not children anymore? Like, that's so bizarre. And then like halfway through the conversation, they're like, wait, they drink some other animal's milk? And they like all are like getting squicked out and like freaking out about it. It's so funny and very, very charmingly written. And Becky Chambers is really good at writing characters that feel really warm and that have moments of like sincerity and joy and laughter and these kinds of things. In general, she's a very optimistic author, which is something that I really appreciate, especially in the context of sci-fi, which is so often kind of dystopian. It's not full on utopian either. There are still problems and things like that, but she does imagine a universe that is kinder than the world that we currently live in.
That's nice.
Which I really do appreciate.
Yeah. That's nice every once in a while.
But she has this series of books called the Monk and Robot series, which are cool. In this kind of post-apocalyptic or post-crisis world where there was a big industrialized automation thing that happened, and then all the robots kind of liberated themselves, and humanity gave half the world to robots. And that half is all wild. So it's just nature growing, and the robots are just like chilling out in the woods and stuff. And then human society has become extremely kind of circular or contained in the sense that everything is solar and wind powered. And the main character has their little like bike powered trailer thing that they're driving around doing tea offerings for people, because they're involved in a monastic tradition of tea. And sharing tea with people as like a therapeutic act. And so this monk decides that like they're just going to go off into the wilderness, which is like kind of not allowed because they're sick of the city life. They need a change, and they go out into the woods. They get kind of lost and stuck because the roads are ruined and they can't really travel around there, but they're trying to go to this specific place. And they encounter a robot and said robot has never met a human before, and the human has never met a robot before. And so there's a theme here you can see in Becky's writing, but they learn about each other and each other's histories, and become friends kind of tenuously while journeying to this place that the monk wants to go to, because the robot is supposed to go and learn about people. That's like their job that they're supposed to be doing, and they're kind of lost along the way. So again, very, very charming book with characters that you immediately love and who are very relatable and have quirky little moments and humorous moments and heartfelt moments. Very, very fun series of books.
And it sounds like she does a lot of what I love in good sci-fi, which is thinking through, well, if this happened, then what? Right. Yeah. And what does that mean? And how does that unfold? And it also sounds like what she does with that is say, maybe it's not as different as we think it is, right? So on the surface, maybe a lot has changed, but maybe not as much has changed as we thought it has. It sounds like it has that type of theme to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, yeah, all writing is actually about now. This is the thing that a lot of like tech working people with really dumb ideas fail to realize, is that like the dystopia is about right now. It's about our society. It's not about some future society that doesn't exist. And so, yeah, in that same way, right, these are about things that we could be doing now, or ways that we could be living now, or the ways in which the ways we are living now are dysfunctional. It's engaging with all of that stuff in really hopeful and uplifting ways, which is, again, I cannot overstate how nice that is to have in fiction. How refreshing it is.
A touch of optimism in our sci-fi is not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, I think people, and there's lots of good reasons to be hopeless, but a lot of people feel really hopeless these days. And on the one hand, I can't blame them, but also I think that a media environment that denies you any optimism, or that can't tell stories where good things happen, does contribute to that. And it makes people feel like there isn't anything that they can do, when there are, in fact, lots of things that they could be doing. It's just that we are ideologically kind of opposed to acknowledging those things or accepting those things as being good.
Definitely. So those are some books. Is there any, I'm interested as far as like any movies or any less highbrow hobbies of yours?
I'm a very highbrow person.
You are. I'm very intimidated right now, Andrew.
I mean, I'm kind of weird that way in that I don't like watching on TV. I do enjoy movies quite a lot, but I haven't watched any lately. I've mostly been reading books and trying to kind of educate myself, I guess. I do a lot of listening to podcasts on academic or news related kind of topics, not necessarily too serious along the way, but still, yeah, like, gosh, I've become very boring. If newspapers were still really a thing, I'd be sitting there with my newspaper telling someone not to interrupt me while I read about the economy or whatever. Like it's become quite dull, I'm afraid.
Welcome to getting older, my friend.
I guess so.
Is that go through phases with you? So do you go through phases where you have very serious focus on some heavy shit, and then where you run away and go for light stuff afterwards? Or has this been a straight line for you?
Yeah, I think there is kind of a waxing and waning of it, and that it is connected to, like, where my mental health is at, like where my mood is at. Sure. If I'm really in a funk, I will just watch TV. But that's usually how I know that that's like, oh, okay, I'm like really not having a great time right now, if this is all I can kind of muster the wherewithal to do. So for me, it's a bit of a sign of the times. And like the games that I do play and the kind of more frivolous activities that I get involved in usually involve other people, because I'm not super keen to play video games on my own, because I will just like do it for too long and get into a weird rut. But playing games with friends, totally different, a bit more naturally limiting, because people will need to like go to bed or eat or whatever, and there will be a break, and I will be like, oh yeah, get away from the computer, stop playing. So in that sense, I've been very fortunate that I have a group of people that I can like hang out with and play games with, and that's how I spend like every night on a Discord with some friends of mine, and that's a nice gift. That was very, very much a lifeline during the pandemic height, where I was super, super isolated because the combination of disability and the pandemic was just like, okay, I am fully out of public life now. I had 1 year, 2019 was the year where I was out of the hospital and had figured things out enough that I could do stuff. Like I went to Big Bad Con that year. And then I was like, okay, I'm starting to figure things out and like kind of hit my stride. And then the pandemic happened. Jesus. I was like, okay, never mind. Everything sucks. Actually, it was a real blow, and that really set me back quite a ways.
I don't think I could even imagine, Andrew, and I don't think I fully realized how recent this was for you. And then, I mean, everybody, we talk about how we lost 2 or 3 years of our lives, but that was happening right at a crucial right turn in your life. Wow.
Yeah, it was wild. And I bet more years now of my life living with disability have also featured a pandemic, right? And that deeper isolation is the majority of my experience in this way. And so, yeah, it's really hard to like untangle those two things conceptually.
Yep.
Because it does make it a lot harder because, the condition that has, paralyzed me is an autoimmune condition. My own body, my own immune cells go after my spinal cord. So I'm on an immune suppressing medication to mitigate that. Yep. And I do need to be more careful. And these various medication cycles I have to be really aware of in terms of when I get my vaccinations. And it's had to, change up that schedule, which further kind of limits my ability to go outside at certain points. And, it's a lot of stuff to manage is what I'll say. And that it has pushed me into a pretty intense isolation over these years. Like I'm still mostly stuck at home most of the time. That's something that, in a much smaller way, but I'm on immune suppressants as well for my Crohn's disease. And it was hard to explain to some people, like, this is more than just me getting sick, right? It's, it was hard to explain to some people. And coupled with the fact with Crohn's disease, there was a concern for a bit of time that they didn't know what a COVID infection would do to the disease, right? Because it potentially could cause, and I don't know if this would be true for you, but there was a fear that it would cause a full attack, right? That the reaction of the immune system would be that. And, but it also, I don't know if you're this type of person, but it also played into my natural introvert natures. So it's real easy for me to bury myself. Right. Yeah, exactly.
So you could give me an excuse not to be with people and I will take that excuse. And I have learned, thanks to a wonderful wife, that that's not good for me and maybe that I should be pressed out of that. So God bless. That's incredible, Andrew. It now it makes the optimism thing even clearer and how important that must be.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, boy, we got real heavy, real fast, Andrew. I'm liking this. I appreciate you going there with me. Tabletop gaming, and that interaction and that sense of community that comes from it. I'd like to finish off by finding out, has there recently can be in the last 5-10 years, has there been a game that you have not made that really a session or a campaign or something that was important to you? I'd be curious to know if there's been a tabletop experience that really has stuck with you. It's something that I find fascinating about the hobby. And I'd be curious if you can think of a time where you've had either a session or a series of sessions or a table that really just, as soon as I start asking the question, that's what pops into your mind.
Yeah, I mean, there is, of course, the one session of Girl by Moonlight where I got my publishing deal. That's like the first one that looms very large in my memory. Sure. I can't look past that one. And that was with a bunch of really wonderful people.
Yeah.
But more recently, I did get to play Dream Askew with some friends of mine.
I've yet to play that game, but God, I've read it and it's so good.
It's very good. Really easy to get into. Very, very wonderful set of themes that it's engaging with, and a lot of like recontextualizing of certain familiar elements from like Apocalypse World or things like this. So if you're in the game playing space already, it's got lots to offer you, or if you're new to it, it's very easy to pick up. And so just a very solid table of very experienced role players, getting into that game that is so collaborative, and the power distribution is really flat in that game, or the responsibility distribution, or however you want to describe it, where there is no GM or anything like that. And so everyone is really acting very broadly within their interaction with the game, right? You're wearing a lot of different hats and doing a lot of different things. And so you get to see, getting to see all these very skilled role players flexing their skills very broadly was really, really delightful. And I then also, even more recently, got to play Orbital for a friend's birthday, and we're going to do our second session of it, which should hopefully wrap things up.
I'm not familiar with Orbital. What's Orbital?
And Orbital is another Belonging Outside Belonging game. So it's basically like a hack of Dream Askew. Right. That's like a sci-fi thing where everything takes place on a space station.
Oh, that's cool.
That is kind of neutral ground within this very complicated galaxy. Has beautiful art attached to it, and a really cool for online play. They have this Miro board set up that's gorgeous and really, really easy to use. So it's really nice in that way. We're using that. And again, that same thing of just, everyone getting to collaborate and make big contributions and small contributions and play characters. And yeah, it's been really great as like a shorter format, easier to drop into kind of game. That is still really, really fruitful and generates a lot of cool stories and good creative output, which is no easy feat. It's a real testament to the design at work there that it pulls all that stuff off. So
yeah, and it facilitates all of that, right? And makes that happen. I'm not going to lie to you, Andrew. This interview could have been 3 hours longer. I've really, really enjoyed our time together. I preface with my guests, listeners all the time that I never quite know what we're going to talk about and what direction we're going to go in. And this is a perfect example of where I think that we've got a much better sense of what the game is by really getting a better sense of who you are. So I appreciate you going down that path with me.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And everybody knows they can scroll down and they're going to have links to everything. We're recording this before the crowdfunding begins, but now if you're listening to it, that crowdfunding is out there. So you've got to go check this out. I think it was a day or two ago, I got to see the new cover for the book. I've got to tell you that in the sneak peeks that we got, that made me reach out to say, I need to talk to Andrew, help me. The art is so evocative, and to see that cover, it's just absolutely gorgeous. So, but if someone is listening to this going, Craig, I do wish this was a 4-hour interview with Andrew, where can they get more Andrew?
So you can follow me on social media. My Twitter is @CommutingCrow, and I'm on co-host as @Andrew Gillis. If they want more Girl by Moonlight stuff, they can go on the crowdfunder and back that. There are also a bunch of actual plays that are happening concurrently with the crowdfunding. So Pixel Circus just today posted a teaser image for their game that they're going to be running. And there are going to be a few others out there as well. So I'll be promoting those on my social media as well.
Awesome. And this is being done through Evil Hat. So even if you're listening to this and the crowdfunding is over, you're still going to be able to get it by going to our good friends at Evil Hat. Thanks again, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been great.
And for those of you listening, this is the end. You made it through the whole thing. I appreciate you too. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to Tabletop Talk and share it with your friends. Check out our content on YouTube and Twitch. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook and stay updated on everything coming from Third Floor. All the links are in the show notes. Take care, floorheads.
Oh, hey, are you still here? Wow. Well, the episode is over, but if you're bored, why not go to patreon.com and support the show for as little as $1 a month? Yeah, you can just scroll down and get the link. It's Patreon that makes this and all of our other content possible. Don't you want to join the other floorheads on the Patreon Discord? Anyway, thanks for sticking around. Take care. Bye.